Good morning, everyone. Happy Easter. Listen, I love Easter. I love Easter for a lot of reasons. I remember growing up, my favorite thing to get in my Easter basket was the sweet tart rabbits and ducks. Anybody else remember these? Yeah, okay, cool, two of us, good. But I love to find these in my Easter basket. Every year it was a family tradition, like many of you, that you find Easter baskets. And so, to kind of get things started this morning, I want us to have a little bit of an Easter hunt as well. And so, underneath two of your chairs, I have hidden a couple of gift cards to restaurants. So I need everybody to stand up and check under your seat to see if you won that gift card. I'm just kidding, April Fools. Oh, man. There's some of you that were stretching, getting ready, all the way under there. We're ready to go. Hey, I really am glad that you're here. If you're a guest this morning checking us out, I'm thrilled that you're here to celebrate Easter with us. Over the last month or so at Crossroads, we've been asking this question or answering it together. And the question is, why did Jesus come to this earth? Why did Jesus come? What was the point? And looking at that question, why did Jesus come to this earth? We've answered it in different ways. We've answered it with the word change. He was coming to bring change. And we've answered it with the word authority. He was coming to bring a new authority. We've answered it with the word brokenness and worship and humility. We've answered this question with a lot of words. But the simple answer that continues to transcend all of these other answers is that he came to save us from our sins. It seems the simple answer, but it is the answer. And the day that we celebrate that at its pinnacle is the day when Jesus walked out of the tomb, which is today. It's Resurrection Day. That I believe with every bit of my being, Jesus stood up and walked out. And as he did that, as he walked out of that tomb, he demonstrated that not even death wins. Not even death wins. That resurrection brings life. Resurrection brings life, and Jesus wants us to experience that life. I want to pray, and we're going to jump in this morning. Jesus, I am so thankful for your goodness. I'm thankful that we have this time every week when we can celebrate how good you are. But Jesus, today we celebrate you walking out of a tomb. God, we celebrate you sending your son to rescue us, to save us, to give us life. And so, Father, I pray this morning that you will breathe that life into this room. God, I pray that if we're here for the first time and not sure why we're here, God, I pray that you will show us, and you will show us what life looks like. Jesus, we're thankful for forgiveness, from the mess of our lives, for the mistakes of our life. Jesus, we're thankful that because of what you did on a cross and a tomb, we can sit here as a room full of imperfect people and celebrate today. It's in your name that we pray. Amen. Since I was little, pretty much as long as I can remember, I have had asthma. Anybody else have asthma in the room? Okay, yeah, that's right. There's some of us. We're proud of it. Okay, which means that I have had to tote one of these guys around with me. Okay. Almost my entire life. This is my inhaler, okay? Which means that if I have an asthma attack, something goes wrong, I need this within proximity for me to be able to breathe, to continue to have life, all right? And so wherever we go, I remember needing this to make sure it goes with me, all right? It's like the annoying friend that follows you everywhere, okay? That's what this guy's been for me. And so when I go to the gym to work out, occasionally, I have to make sure that I have that with me. If I go play basketball, I have to make sure I have that with me. If I go run, no, never mind. Okay, but I have to make sure that my inhaler is with me because I have grown dependent on it for life. If I have an attack, I need that to continue to bring life. When I was in 8th grade, I wanted to try out for the freshman baseball team. But in order to do so, you had to pass this physical where you had to run a certain distance in a certain amount of time. They were measuring your athleticism to make sure that you keep up with the freshmen and the guys in high school. And so I went the day to try out, and I had to run a mile under a certain time. You know what I never do? run a mile, ever. Then, now, I never run a mile. And so it came time for me to run the mile, and we started, and they said, you have to get it done in this amount of time. And so as we would come around the track, they would tell us how much time we have left. And I got to lap 3, and they were like, negative 12 minutes, not really. But I started coming around, and I could feel my chest getting tight, and I could feel this asthma attack coming on. And I was like, I don't have time to go and find an inhaler in my bag, which is sitting off the side. I don't have time for that. I got to get this done. And so I said that I was going to fight it off. The only thing was it didn't work. As much as I wanted to fight it off, I couldn't fight it off, and so I had to stop, and I had to go, and I had to get my inhaler out of my bag. And now at this point, I realize I'm not going to make the time. And so because of my dependency on this guy right here, I missed out on something that I really wanted. And I know we raise our hands if we have asthma, and we're not going to continue to raise our hands, but I think that there's others of us in life that are dependent on other things. There are some of us in the room this morning that we have grown dependent on our job. We've grown dependent on our job and the title that accompanies our job. And if we didn't have that, we would feel lost or without. But there are some of us that we have grown dependent on a relationship, having someone close, having someone that's by us, and maybe they're not even married to us, they're just with us, and we've grown dependent on that relationship. There's some of us that we've grown dependent on money. It shapes our life. Or even the appearance of money. We might not have it, we just want to appear as though we do. And so we have grown dependent on trying to achieve this. There's some of us that maybe a time in our life, or maybe right now in our life, we've been dependent on a drug or alcohol or some sort of addiction like that. You see, the problem is when we depend on these items in life, what we're doing is we're trying to cultivate for ourselves a life that's not real. We're trying to mask other issues, and we're trying to make this life something that we really want, even though it's not what it is. And because the dependency on something that we try to cultivate, all it does is rob our life of the value that God has placed in it. And what we do is we try to say, well, I mean, if I have this, and if I have this, and if I have this, then this is life. And I would say you're right. But I would also argue and say it's not the best life. And some of us might be sitting here thinking, well, Matt, I don't get this whole Jesus gig. I mean, life is good, and I've got a job, and I've got a husband or a wife, and I've got some kids, and I've got, things seem to be taken care of, and I haven't done, these terrible, terrible things. I'm better than this guy, and so, what's the whole point of this? I have life, and you're right, you do have life, but you don't have the life that God designed, and I believe with every bit of my being, when we involve Jesus in our life turns into something that we did not expect. It turns into something more than we could ever have imagined. When we let go of that dependency on what we control in life, and we trust in this life that Jesus has for us, we reach this richer jet stream of life that we've never experienced before. And it's all possible because Jesus stepped out of a grave. We're going to be hanging out in John chapter 20 this morning. We've been studying John for a little over a month, and we're kind of ending it today at John chapter 20 if you brought a Bible. Otherwise, it'll be on the screens, or you can look it up on your phone. At John 20, we see this resurrection unfold. We see the reactions of some of the people as they begin to realize Jesus is not dead anymore. The problem is they didn't quite realize that. They just noticed, wait a minute, he's not here. And as we look at John 20 this morning, I think we're going to see a couple of moments in the discovery of Jesus not being in the tomb that we can resonate with. John chapter 20, beginning in verse 1, says this. Early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the entrance. So she came running to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one Jesus loved, which is John, and said, "They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we don't know where they have put him." So Peter and the other disciple started for the tomb. Both were running, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. He bent over and looked in at the strips of linen lying there, but he did not go in. Then Simon Peter came along behind him and went straight into the tomb. He saw the strips of linen lying there, as well as the cloth that had been wrapped around Jesus' head. The cloth was still lying in its place, separate from the linen. Finally, the other disciple who had reached the tomb first also went in. He saw and believed. They still did not understand from Scripture that Jesus had to rise from the dead. Then the disciples went back to where they were staying. Now Mary stood outside the tomb crying. As she wept, she bent over, looking into the tomb, and saw two angels in white, seated where Jesus' body had been, one at the head and the other at the foot. They asked her, "Woman, why are you crying?" They have taken my Lord away, she said, "and I don't know where they have put him." At this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, but she did not recognize it was Jesus. He said to her, "Woman, why are you crying? Who is it that you are looking for?" Thinking this was the gardener, she said, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will get him." Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned around and cried out in Aramaic, "Rabboni," which means teacher. Jesus said, "Do not hold on to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father. Go instead to my brothers and tell them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and to your God." Mary Magdalene went to the disciples with the news. "I have seen the Lord," and she told them that he had said these things to her. It's early in the morning, and Mary and some of the other women, they are on their way to the tomb. You see, Jewish people, they honored the burial process. They also honored the tombs and the graves of people. And so as they're on their way to visit the tomb where Jesus was at, they get there only to realize that the stone that had been over the opening is rolled away. And they look in it and he's not there. Mary takes off and goes back to the room where the disciples are at. You see, the disciples, they don't know what to do. The disciples, they have grown dependent on Jesus being there, telling them what to do, where he's going to go, what he's going to do, and all of a sudden now he's not. And so the disciples, they don't know. They don't know, am I going to be killed? Am I going to be punished? So the disciples are hanging out together. Mary busts into the room. She swings the door wide open. She says, "Guys, listen. Jesus' body is gone." And before she could get any more words out, Peter and John take off. They bust out the door and say, "No way, it can't be. He can't be gone. He has to be there." And so they take off and start running to where this tomb is at. John, he must be the skinny guy, the athletic guy. Peter, he's like me, all right? He's the more husky kid. He drags behind. You know, John, he's athletic and he's just smiling and running. You know, Peter's lagging behind a little bit. John gets there out of breath, kind of gasping for air. He leans against the side of the wall and he looks in. And as he looks in, he sees the strips of linen that had been wrapped around Jesus' body. He just stares as this stone slate where Jesus' body had been laid now is empty. As John is standing there, just observing, looking in, Peter comes running up behind him, except for Peter doesn't stop at the door. Peter just busts right through the door and steps right into this tomb. And he's standing right before this slate, and he's looking, and all he sees is the linen over here that had been wrapped around his body, and the cloth that had been wrapped around his head, and it's just laying there right in front of him. And Peter's just gasping for air, looking at all of these linens just sitting right in front of him. And then there's Mary. Mary's standing at the door. And she's crying, weeping, because Jesus isn't there. When you look at these three characters and the way that they encounter the tomb, maybe we don't realize it, but I think that there's many of us that can find ourselves in the shoes of one of these characters. You see, there's John. John, he wanted to see, but he was afraid to get too close. He stands at the door and he observes, looking in. But he doesn't want to get too close to where Jesus was at. He stands at the door and he looks, but he keeps it an arm's length away. He doesn't want to go all the way in until Peter gets there. And so he's just standing, observing and looking in, a little bit afraid, a little bit nervous, not sure even what to do or what to expect. And there's some of us here this morning that we can resonate with John. And we maybe are observing this church Jesus thing, but we're afraid to get too close. And maybe we've been here week after week, but we're afraid to get too close to Jesus. We're afraid of what it might challenge us to do. Or we're afraid of what we might learn. We're afraid of how it might change us. We're afraid of what we might need to change when we realize what Jesus calls us to. And like John, we're just standing, leaning against the door, observing, but not wanting to get too close. And then there's Peter. Peter, he runs right in. You see, it was Peter just a couple days earlier that denied even knowing Jesus. Imagine the guilt of knowing that you denied even knowing Jesus. Not once, not twice, but 3 times in front of a crowd of people. The guilt that is just riding on Peter's back as he runs into the tomb and he observes the linens and the cloths, and he just stands there looking. While he's looking, he still doesn't know what to do. And even while standing in the tomb, he recognizes the guilt of what he has done. Because a little bit later on, when he encounters Jesus, the first thing he brings up. Peter is standing there, and he's observing where Jesus was. But also Peter has to know what he did. And there's some of us this morning that while we're here observing Jesus, it's hard to recognize what he's done in our life. Because there's guilt of what we know that we've done. There's guilt that sits on our shoulders and weighs us down. And while we stand looking at Jesus and looking at Jesus' people, it's hard because we're kind of caught in this in-between, knowing what we've done, but yet still observing Jesus looking forward. And so guilt has us buckled down, even while we're standing and looking. And then there's Mary. And as Mary stands at the door, she weeps. She weeps, she's crying. She's crying to the point where angels show up. And I've never seen an angel, but from everything that's described in the Bible, they're hard to miss. When the first thing they have to say every time is, "Don't freak out." Like, that tells me that they're noticeable. They don't just sneak up on you, right? And there's 2 of them now, not just one. And they're sitting in the tomb, and Mary is just weeping and crying. And their first question to her is, "Why are you crying? Why are you crying?" And what Mary is doing is Mary is crying over where Jesus isn't. It was part of her plan for Jesus to be here. I mean, he died, and so he's supposed to be in the tomb. And I mean, that's how this happens. And Jesus isn't here, and this is where his body was put. And I mean, that's what happens. And now Jesus is not here, and Mary's crying because Jesus isn't where she thought that he needed to be. And how many of us spend so many days in our life complaining about where Jesus isn't in our life instead of noticing where he is? Jesus shows up right behind Mary and says, "Why are you crying?" And Mary is so fixated on where Jesus isn't that she misses him standing right there. And she thinks that he's just the gardener. And he says, "Again, if you've taken him, just tell me where he's at, and I will go get his body." And then Jesus looks and says, "Mary." And I don't know if he said it a certain way, but when Jesus calls Mary's name, there is life breathed back into her. because she wheels around and she looks, and then she realizes Jesus is right here. He's alive. He's right in front of me. And she must have fallen, grabbed hold of his knees, or wrapped her arms around him, because his immediate response was, don't hold on too long. Well, wait a minute, Mary. Don't get too attached, because I'm not done yet. I'm not finished this thing out. Mary, there is still more to come. I can't imagine hearing that after seeing someone who was dead, now alive, hearing there's still more. What more? And here Jesus is alive, standing right behind her. And when Mary hears her name, and when Mary recognizes that Jesus is alive, it changes everything about her. Everything that Mary had known up until this point about life now is stood on its head. People are not supposed to come back from the dead. And now here Jesus is. And when you look at the story of the disciples, when you look at the people that encountered the resurrection, everybody that came within proximity of the resurrection, their lives were changed forever. I mean, you look at Peter, the guy that was just denied Jesus. Here a couple weeks later, Peter stands up in front of the crowd of people that just killed him and delivers this sermon that is so powerful and so strong, it says that people were cut to the heart and recognized their need to change. And so they asked, what do we need to do? Peter's life, when it encounters the resurrection, is radically transformed. Jesus' brother James, who always doubted, I don't have a brother, but I guarantee if I told my sister I'm the Messiah, she's got a laundry list of things to say why I'm not, right? James, Jesus' brother, says, no, you're not it. Eventually, when he understands the resurrection, becomes a church leader in the church moving forward. You see, everybody that comes in contact with the resurrection, their lives are transformed forever. The church, Jewish customs was that they worshiped on Friday and Saturday. And when the resurrection happened, it gave credibility to everything that Jesus was about, to the point that this whole group of people changed their day of worship. A huge life shift for them. The church begins then to take communion, like we just did together. This celebration moment. And it's not a celebration of death, it's a celebration of life. But without the resurrection, communion is strange. Like it doesn't hold credibility. Without the resurrection, communion is just this like vampire event where we celebrate death. But because Jesus is not dead anymore, and because he walked out of a grave, because he's alive, we celebrate life together. You see, history screams that Jesus lives up to his word. In John chapter 11, verse 25, Jesus says, I am the resurrection and life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die. And when Jesus walks out of a tomb, he gives credibility to his word on everything that he has said, because now he literally has resurrected from the grave. And when Jesus walks out of a tomb with life, he invites us to life as well. You see, our truth for this morning is this: life transforms when Jesus gets involved. Life transforms when Jesus gets involved. We no longer have to depend on ourselves and depend on the crutches in our life to cultivate this life that will get us by. We no longer have to live on the dependencies of this world to try to create this life that seems somewhat enjoyable. When Jesus gets involved in our life, he transforms everything. Because Jesus brings life. A movie that I enjoyed watching, don't anybody judge me too much, but a movie that I enjoyed watching was the movie Hitch. Anybody remember this movie Hitch? Yeah. Okay, so the movie Hitch, which is Will Smith, all right, his character in this movie, he helps guys who would appear to be a little bit dorky. He helps guys who don't get lots of dates. He helps these guys get dates with really pretty women. All right? And so the whole movie is him helping these different individuals. And the main one in the movie is this guy named Albert Brenneman. Okay? Albert Brenneman is not a guy that has ladies just lining up at his door wanting to go on dates. Albert Brenneman is clumsy, and he does not get the attention of women very much. And so Hitch helps Albert Brenneman get a date with the woman that he wants to get a date with. Her name was Allegra Cole. Allegra Cole is this tall, blonde-head, pretty girl, and so they finally go on a date. A scene in this movie that I absolutely love is the scene that unfolds of their first kiss. Okay? And if you remember a movie, you know how this plays out, but Albert is nervous. He's nervous, he's scared, okay? And so Hitch kind of coaches him through how this kiss is going to unfold. All right, and there's the whole 90-10 principle, which you can watch the movie and get that part, okay? But there's also this coaching of, listen, when you go to the door, all right, if she plays with her keys, that means that she wants a kiss, all right? If she just walks in the door, tough luck, okay? But if she plays with her keys, then, you know, you're good. Okay, so this scene unfolds and the door opens and Allegra gets out and they're walking awkwardly next to each other up to the door. And they stand at the door and they look at one another, and Allegra says, I had a really good time tonight, Albert. And he said, me too. And then it shows she's playing with her keys, which means he's got the green light, according to Hitch. All right, he's got the green light. She's playing with her keys. And Albert says, well, have a good night, and turns and walks away. And you can see as Albert walks away, there is frustration on his face. He knows that he just missed his opportunity with Allegra Cole. And as he walks away, this is where Albert and we kind of, connect. You see, Albert has asthma as well. All right, and you see Albert begin to wheeze, and Albert pulls out his inhaler, and he's got his inhaler right here, just about ready to grab hold of the life that he's used to. And then the music shifts. And Albert turns around and he says, Allegra! And he chucks his inhaler down the sidewalk. And he walks back up, and in one of the most awkward kisses in all of somatic history, Albert kisses Allegra Cole. You see, Albert realized that I have life right here, but it's not the best life. He realizes in this moment, right as he is about to turn around, there is something better. There's something better, and I have to recognize that. Albert recognizes that there is life better than what I control and what I depend on. In that moment, Albert realizes there's a better life. And this morning, I really believe that there are some of us this morning that need to believe the same thing. That there is a better life than the things that we've been depending on in this world. There is a Jesus who went to a cross, who laid in a tomb, and walked out of a tomb for you and for me, for our life. Jesus went to a cross and walked out of a grave to give us life. And the question this morning is, will you choose life? Will you choose life in Jesus? A life that is no longer built on the dependencies of this world, but is built on the freedoms that are found in a cross. To choose life that is not about the guilt and not about the shame and not about all of the mistakes that we drag around like a duffel bag, but it is about life that is free, that it was weight-free, it is guilt-free, it is shame-free, because Jesus walked out of a tomb and said, there is nothing that I did not put to death and bury once for all. And so the question is, will we choose life? Because life transforms when Jesus gets involved. This morning, there are some of us that we need to choose a life where Jesus is involved. We're going to worship together. We're going to worship together. We're going to celebrate life. But there are some of us here this morning. I believe I believe there are some of us here this morning that we need to choose life and we need to bury the old in baptism. This Easter, when we celebrate Jesus coming back to life, is the day that we need to decide to quit holding on, quit playing pretend, and quit trying to fake it or come up with something on our own, and we need to choose life and bury our old away. For many of us, our dependency is like chains, and we drag them around with us everywhere. I want to do it, but I can't because of, and we talk ourselves out of it, and we carry this dependency around all over the place. And Jesus says, I want to give you life. I want to give you life. What we just read, anyone who believes in me will have life, even if they die. This morning, will we choose life? Bury our old in the waters of baptism and be raised to something new. Will we choose life? Why don't we go ahead and stand together? We're going to worship and sing together. A couple songs that just kind of ache these words, ache this celebration of what Jesus did for us on the cross and the tomb. That he took all of our sin, he took our mistakes, and he put them to death. And now we're free. A song that just repeats this word, that we are resurrecting. That Jesus brings life. And maybe this morning, some of us are John, but we're afraid to get too close. This morning, will you choose life and get close? Some of us maybe are Peter, but we're carrying this guilt even though we're observing. Maybe this morning we choose life without guilt. Maybe some of us this morning are Marys. We're complaining and crying about where Jesus isn't, and we're missing where he is in our life. And this morning, will we choose life where Jesus is? Life is transformed when Jesus gets involved. As we worship and as we sing, if you want to choose life, bury your old in baptism. Maybe you say, well, I don't know, Matt. I mean, it's Easter. I got my hair did. My makeup's done. I can't do that today. Why not? It's an excuse. Today is the day when we celebrate life. And what a better day to choose life than the day when we celebrate life. And so if you're in this spot, as we worship, I'm going to be hanging out right down here in this corner. If you want to make this choice today, we've got t-shirts that look like this. They'll look better on you than me, I guarantee it. It says, I choose life. I choose Jesus and a life of freedom over everything that this world has to offer. Because our lives are transformed when Jesus gets involved. If that's where you're at, I'll be down here throughout the next couple songs.